Well, I really appreciate your time, and it's rare that I'll watch something that's so powerful that I'll reach out to on my own, because normally like I do press interviews that are sent my way, and
Sure.
I appreciate you giving me the time to talk to you. So thank you.
Thanks for reaching out.
My wife's literal comment when this ended was, "I felt like I left my body" during
Wow.
it. That was her exact words, and we were both just like shaking a little bit about what we just experienced. And art has the ability to do that. It moves you in such ways. It makes you think about your own identity, obviously, which is the big question of the show. I wanted to ask you, is there a piece of art or creativity or movie or song that has done that for you? And I know it's kind of a loaded question,
Oh, that's a
and
big.
there are so many different things, but I mean, is there a piece that moved you like this?
That's a really good question. Um, I don't, I don't know. I've been inspired a great deal by art and artists, and I've had moments that are revelatory. But um, I don't know that I've had that. I think I've wanted to have that feeling,
Hmm.
and um, I take that back. I mean, when I was younger, I remember seeing like Charlie and the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder, and
Yeah.
there's some moments in that film that just when they open the door for the first time to see the chocolate room, and that awe, and that movie definitely left an impact on me in that way of just maybe there's more to this world. Maybe there's a golden ticket out there for me somewhere.
Hmm.
So that might be the closest, something like that.
That's interesting. This is something I don't know if you've already answered this, so forgive me. And I know you talked a lot about the book. The book goes home. Mr. Tomorrow brings it back the
Yeah.
next day, which is fascinating. I know that you had to rely on the person to bring it back to you. There was really no like security in that sense. What happens on the last night of the show? Who's Is there
Great.
a Mr. Tomorrow on the last night of the show?
No, there was no tomorrow because it ended. No, it
What did you
was
do?
I was honest. I said that this is normally this is the point where I'd ask someone to come back tomorrow,
Hmm.
but there is no tomorrow. So will the person from the last show please, raise their hand and come on down? And so they came on down and read their entry, and it was really remarkable because the entry that the woman read, and we see her briefly in the film, but the entry that she read was really, really beautiful, really remarkable, and she ended with the end, which no one had ever done really before, like in
Oh,
a very dramatic the end, and closed the book, and it was just, and she handed it to me, and I said, instead of sending it out with someone, I didn't, I kept it,
so
and
that last entry, is that literally the last thing in the book as of right now? I mean, I know
yeah,
do you have the book still? I
yeah,
mean,
sure,
I know people probably have been asking you about it, but I wanted to
yeah.
ask you specifically that question, but also, was there an entry that gave you a deeper look into what you were doing? Was there? I know all of the entries probably did that because they were explaining what they had experienced in the theater, but were there some that actually helped you dive deeper into your own experience?
The yes, but not because of their stories, but because of their act of writing it. But so, in a sense of
Hmm.
like, um, that probably doesn't make any sense. But
I get what you're saying.
that I would be surprised by someone's the beauty, like their entry would be so poetic and beautiful. I would have to reflect on not just the fact that not what they wrote, which was sometimes was remarkable, but it was that they wrote it and I didn't see it coming. And
Mm.
part of that is because like maybe my expectations were too low, like I had some people, took it seriously, others used it as a platform to showcase themselves, or in a way some people tried their best, and then there were some people who, like there was a little old lady who, she's in the film, and you can see, it's the one I send back to this, her seat at the very
Mm.
end. There's a little old lady, and we share a moment, and I'm telling her how remarkable what she wrote was, because it was staggering, and so I was always moved by someone who would surprise me and write something just so beautiful, or heartfelt, and normal people. I'd ask them afterwards, "Are you a poet or a writer?" And they'd be like, "No, I'm an accountant," or
Mm.
"No, I'm a stay-at-home mom or something." And it's just like there's so much life and beauty in these people, and all they needed was a moment and an opportunity to let that shine through. And
Mm.
so it's their act is what actually usually inspired me or made me think about the work in a way that reminded me of what the work was about. And so
Wow.
it wasn't just the entries; it was their gesture or whatever they
Mm.
their act.
And while you have the book, I am just curious to see the
Yeah,
last entry, just out of
yeah, yeah,
curiosity.
yeah,
I would, because I kept wondering that when the film ended. I'm like, I wonder what he did
yeah.
on the last night.
Uh, 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 yeah, it's just an intro. I mean, there's an illustration which was put there by
Huh.
by I don't know. That may be just a coincidence that's there, but the
Oh,
lady
I
just
see
wrote
it.
something.
Yeah.
She just wrote a nice entry,
Oh my God.
and
It looks like my notes for my questions that I wrote you today.
oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
what it looks like.
yeah.
But
Yeah, and she wrote a very flattering, very nice thing about one of the creating one of the most magical events of all time, and that they were all there to witness it at the end. It was a really amazing, heartfelt entry, and it was like a perfect way to close. And I felt it was good because I felt with her putting that seal of the end on it really made it feel
mm.
like it was the end. It was really nice.
Would you ever consider publishing that? And I'm about to pre-order your book, which comes out in March, and I can't wait to read it. I love the
Oh,
cover.
thank you.
I love the how it
Yeah,
just continues in.
yeah.
But would you ever consider publishing that?
I've talked about it. I'm not opposed to it. Is the answer?
I'd read it. Yeah.
It's more complicated than not because it's massive, and you like creating a one to one is challenging, especially since there are three dimensional objects in there. There's pop ups. There's things like that. So it would become a question of curation and things like that. So it's an undertaking, and I just haven't had time to really consider it.
No, I'm watching this film, and I'm watching you emotionally go through what you go through every night. And I'm imagining it in my mind, like he went through this over 500 times or so, like just emotionally. I mean, there's moments where you're just breaking down, and I wanted to
Right.
break down with you. It was just incredible, and I wanted to know at the end of the experience, what's something you learned about yourself that you didn't know going into it? Because that's the whole purpose, right? Like, you're trying to understand identity and not being labeled as one thing or the other, but was there something that you learned about your own self from doing the shows that kind of like hit you in a special way?
Um, I learned about the depth depth of work,
Mm.
and how you can how far you can take something, and in terms of like there's work that's done at a surface level. There's good work can be done at a surface level. Then there's you dig a little deeper, and you know w- I didn't realize how far you could take something,
Mm.
and how far I could go, and how far you needed to go to really create something that is that authentic, and even though it's all artifice in a sense, but how you can come full circle to creating something, to creating an illusion so perfect that it becomes real again. Um,
Mm.
and it really was that I'd never gone that far before.
I obviously did not see the live show, so this is my first experience with the story and kind of the performance that you've put together. But when you go to a live show, an audience member basically edits the way they want to watch it. They look at what they want to look at. They're choosing what to focus on, what to listen to. With a film, it's being chosen for you. The shots are being chosen for you. We're coming in close on your face at this moment in time, or your hands at this moment in time. I want to ask you about that difference in the choices that are made in your film to portray your story, because it probably, I'm assuming, a very different experience from seeing it live, but I wonder like the choices that were made from the shots you were going to choose to tell the story you wanted to tell in the film.
Yeah, it was, carefully considered because we had two things we were balancing. One was the experience for the home viewer, and the other was not betraying the people who had seen the show.
Mm,
And so we needed to make sure that the translation was honest to both, and
mm,
could hold up, so that it needed to feel like it was something. If you saw the show, it was exactly as you remembered it in a way, and if you hadn't seen it, it was delivering what people had experienced in a way that you're experiencing it yourself, but also giving you something that elevates it to be something for the new medium of film, and enhancing it in a way and giving you things that you couldn't necessarily have had in the theater. Um, I've said that the work is the film is truer in many ways to the work than the live show was, because of that reason. You can't really be distracted by things that you normally could be distracted by in the theater,
mm.
of people's skepticism of what's happening in the moment, or it being a theater and being able to look around and wonder what the curtains are made out of.
Hmm.
Those distractions don't exist on film, and so you're basically seeing the story in the purest form of what we want you to hear, and hopefully take away from it.
I loved how raw it felt, in the sense that, like, you have these beautiful rack focuses from your face to whatever's behind you. We have shots where we're in the crowd behind someone's head as we're looking at you, and I'm like peeking around in my home around this head that's in front of me in front of in the show. And I found that to be interesting just from a cinematic perspective, the actual shots, the rack focuses, and some of the moments were like it would go out of focus and then back in focus, and it felt like it was capturing reality. And I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about those almost quote unquote imperfections that made it look more, that made it feel more real, if that makes sense.
It does. They were imperfections. I mean,
Yeah.
these were not these are things that we captured footage in the theater, and then in the edit was where the story was really told. Like any film that's told after, any documentary. This isn't really a documentary because we knew the story, but we didn't know the footage until we had it and really could absorb it, because we did allow for mistakes to be made, and freedom for the camera operators to roam around and shoot things that they felt were important at that moment. There was, of course, lots of footage that was unusable and we couldn't use. And then there were shots where we had to make a decision of, this is the best performance, this is the best moment in terms of like the angle or something magical was captured, but maybe maybe it did change focus in the middle of a shot, and we had to accept those flaws for what they were, and know that it was more important to stay true to it and to tell an authentic story than to try to manufacture something.
Yeah, see, for me as an audience member, when I see something like that, it makes me realize that I'm watching something that is so real, and so to me, it actually added to the immersiveness of it, if that makes any sense, because it's very interesting how it plays out. As we get to the part where you start you start giving, telling people what they chose, essentially the I am. And I wanted to ask you, and forgive me for if I pronounce last name right, Maria Abramovich. I apologize. I was not familiar with her work until I actually watched your show and then researched her. But I wanted to ask you about that moment where you decide to whisper to her. And was that a decision you made in the moment? And because I was wondering, I'm not going to sit here and ask you like a lost in translation thing, like what did Bill Murray say to Scarlett Johansson? Because I don't think you would ever reveal that, but I would love to know the choice of that moment to whisper that to her and not say it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of respect, really. It was I didn't intend to do that, but in that moment, and it was actually much longer than it appears in the film. It was significantly longer, and it was out of respect for her and her who she is, and that I just thought it was appropriate. It just there was no intellect involved. It was just it was what felt appropriate at that moment, and in hindsight, I'm glad. I realized it's the right choice. It's the right choice, but it wasn't an intellectual choice. It was just this feels like the right thing to do, and so that's how that ended up that way.
It was powerful. And then Blaine, obviously, my brother, which is another interesting thing in that moment. You walk up and you see him. Are you prepared to give him the label, or when do you make a decision to say my brother? I found that to be a very emotional thing. It was an artist to artist moment. It felt very real and emotional. I'm just curious what that moment was for you.
It was the same thing. It was the same thing of living in the truth of that moment with the person that I'm in front of, and it was he, we do share something,
Sure.
and it was nice to have that moment and have it captured. Is really, I'm very grateful.
Derek, as I watch this film, I look at the impact you're making on the audience. When you put the letter in front of somebody that from their father or family member, it's truly astounding to watch their reaction, to watch their emotion, to watch how fulfilled they may feel by getting that information. I wonder, have you caught up with any of these people post the show? Have they told you at all about like how their lives have been affected and or changed by what they experienced in that theater?
Yeah, I mean, some of them have reached out. We reached out to some that we felt were it would we didn't want to include them without them being okay with it, because it's a personal thing. Even though we had people sign things, and there were postings that we were filming, and we had legally where we're covered, but emotionally we wanted to make sure that people were okay with it. That was very important to us. It's very interesting how much some of those moments meant to people. Like the reflection, and she was very moved that day, and still remains that way, and it remains a very important part of her story now, because her father passed, and that was the last letter he sent her. But the film came out on an anniversary of his passing, and
Wow.
and it feels like just another moment that she gets to have with him, and so it's really special, and yeah, it's real is the thing. There's no artifice in it. The artifice is getting them to the truth, and so instead of being left with something that's astonishing but untrue, these people are left with something that's true and astonishing, and a reminder of how other people love them and see them, and maybe see things in them that they can't even see in themselves. So yeah, it's had a deep impact on some people, and it's nice to know, and from what I know, positive, in all, because it creates dialogues that maybe were lost, or it reminds people of the connections that they have already.
This is probably it's a very loaded question, just because it's super hypothetical, because it's your show and there's no way of knowing this for sure. But if you were to somehow stumble upon this show outside of yourself in that sense, and go up to that board and pick one of those, which one do you think you would have chosen? I mean, and I know that's the point of the show, is to obviously is not to label people one way or the other, but I wonder what you would have chosen.
I probably would have chosen something that was rebellious, something like whatever was the least confining, to whatever label. Like I would avoid anything that it would have also been metaphoric. I'm guessing it would have been something metaphoric, or I guess literal but vague, like not anarchist, but something that was just not allowing to be labeled, because it really is obviously it's a sore subject, but I made the show so I didn't have to pick one.
I'll end on this question, only because it was the moment that hit me the hardest, was when you tell that person, I'm nobody, and the person just sits down. It is the weight of that moment came through my TV like a ton of bricks, no pun intended. But it genuinely was amazing. And I wonder, like, when the show ended each night, after you have that impact on those people in that theater, would there be conversations in the theater itself? Would you speak to anybody directly afterwards, or would you just kind of go back behind the stage, show was over, and everyone would just leave? Because I feel like that particular individual, when you say you're nobody, I just felt like I wanted to give that person a hug, or I wanted to, like, these people were going through some really deep stuff right there in front of your eyes. So I wonder what it was like when the show ended.
I usually vanished,
Mm.
and unless someone asked to see me, if someone asked to see me, I would always be happy to. But for the most part, there were some nights where I didn't want to see anyone, but because it was so hard. But yeah, I found that people actually didn't, for the most part, didn't want to meet me in a weird way.
Oh.
Like I had done a lot of shows in the past, and people would want to say hi to me afterwards, and I would shake hands and hope you enjoyed it. When I tried that the first few times I did the show, and
Mm.
um, people were, it was a weird dynamic. People, and then I found out later, um, it was actually, I think it was Stephen Colbert who produced the film. He's the first person to tell me, like, oh, I didn't want to meet you, I didn't want to see you, I didn't want to talk to you, I didn't want to have anything to do with you after the show. I was like,
Mm.
why? And he's like, because I didn't want to ruin the experience by meeting you. Like, I didn't want to, he didn't want to meet an actor, he didn't want to know that it wasn't real. He wanted to live in whatever he was feeling, and he felt like meeting me would destroy that.
Mm.
And it might not have, but he didn't want to
Wow.
risk it. He just wanted to leave and not talk to me. And I found that yeah, that was true for a lot of people. They didn't want to. It was too much to interact with me again after
Mm.
the show. But if anyone wanted to speak with me, which oftentimes someone did, then I would come out and happily talk to them.
Yeah, it's almost like a therapy session. It was like incredible to watch people really kind of going through that. But I want to say thank you so much for your time. I know we're out of time now, but I really appreciate it. And Frank Oz obviously did a brilliant job. It was shot gorgeously. My favorite shots in the show, by the way, are the ones, it's like really close in your face as we see like lens flares from the lights as we're like
Oh
going
yeah.
around. I love the cinematic nature of that. So it was very well done. And one thing I want to tell you is that the show, as an audience member who watches it at home, it breathes really well. Like it doesn't feel rushed. I like when you take a beat and there's no dialogue for a second and you're just like letting the room breathe. We got that at home, which was really cool. So I want to say thank you and appreciate everything that you're doing, and what a wonderful experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for saying so, and I appreciate you having me.